Hello and welcome. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception, and we are here today in Acts chapter 27. We only have 2 chapters to go of this book of Acts. The book of Acts, as you may recall from earlier on when we first started the book of Acts in this study, I refer to it as the great adventure novel of the New Testament. You've got disciples going these different places, having these amazing experiences, traveling all over the Mediterranean. And today we get a sailing voyage, a shipwreck, storm at sea, all kinds of amazing stuff. But all of that amazing stuff, as I look here at the thumbnail that I've got on the screen right now, all of that amazing stuff is not really what it is about. I mean, it's exciting, it's adventure, but more important is what God does throughout that adventure and what he does for his own. So we're going to jump in and start studying that and taking a look right now. So as you will recall, Paul had been in prison for over 2 years. We're probably pushing 2.5 years by now. He had been locked up. He had freedom to move about. He wasn't in a traditional jail cell, but one Roman ruler had given way to another, and both had been trying to curry favor with the Jews. And Paul finally decided he knew that the Lord wanted him to go to Rome after he had first been arrested. Jesus stood by him in the night and told him he was going to watch over him and that it was his intention that he go and testify in Rome, that he would proclaim the gospel there in Rome. And so Paul had a sense of peace throughout all of this, but he finally had enough of the political nonsense, and Agrippa and Festus were there, and he spoke, and it was obvious nothing was going to happen. And before that, Paul had appealed to Rome, and the last chapter ended, and Agrippa said to Festus, this man could have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar, which really, when you think of it, is an indictment of the Roman justice that Paul had encountered thus far. He was a Roman citizen. He shouldn't have been jailed. There was nothing worthy of him being arrested. That's King Agrippa saying that. But he wasn't going to encounter justice. That wasn't going to happen. And so he had appealed to the Caesar, which was every Roman citizen's right, with that law was in place in Rome for this very reason. There could be corrupt officials playing politics with your well-being, and in the Roman system, you had the right to appeal to Caesar. So to Caesar you have appealed, and to Caesar you shall go, had said Festus. And so now we travel along with Paul, and not only Paul, we travel along with Paul and his companions on this journey. Chapter 27. And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day, we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. We'll stop there. Several important things here for us to notice. And hopefully you recall that in the book of Acts, in the journeys of Paul, first, second, third missionary journeys, which we have already covered, and then in his journey to Rome, we're always looking for the we passages, and there are many of them. Luke is the author of the book of Acts, and he just subtly puts himself in there saying we. He never names himself as being one of the companions. He's going to name Aristarchus, and in other places he named other traveling companions of Paul. But Luke took a very subdued approach to his own presence in all of this. So when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. We find in other historical records this Augustan cohort. And interestingly here, this centurion, usually when you think of the different places in the Gospels, even earlier in the book of Acts, when it refers to when a central player in a given portion of the book is a centurion, they aren't named. They aren't named. In the Gospels, they're not named. Other places in the book of Acts, they are not named. Here, it gives his name, Julius. Why? Well, probably because Julius is very important. He is very kind to Paul. And later on, at the end of this chapter, we're going to see that Julius was very kind to Paul. And so that merits him mention here. And I'll just throw out the idea. It's nothing but a thought. Maybe Julius gets named because Julius was converted through all of this. That's kind of a long shot, but definitely he's named because he plays an important role in all of this. His kindness and him looking out for Paul. And it leads you to wonder if he hadn't been around and seen the stuff that was going on, not just as Paul interacted with first Felix and then Festus. There, I got him in the first Felix and then Festus. Not only that, but he would have been privy to some of the behind the scenes discussion of what was going on with this guy. Maybe we can suppose, and it's nothing more than our conjecture, that Julius kind of believed Paul had been getting a raw deal. That could be as well. We don't know. But they embarked in this ship of Adramyttium that was about to sail to ports along the coast of Asia. Time for a map. We love our maps. So they're down here in Caesarea. Going to tell us they're going to go up to Sidon, but they were going to sail along the coast of Asia. Now, Asia especially begins over here. This is the way they intended to go, up along here. Remember, the ships of the day, they weren't like sailing ships that we think of. They did I won't go into the technical stuff, which actually I'd be kind of faking it anyway, because I know there were differences. The way they were able to sail against the wind, they could only sail with the wind. That technology that allowed them, when you think of the sailing ships of the 1800s, where they could tack the sails and sail against the wind, that hadn't been invented. The Romans, at least with the common ships, that wasn't something that they knew. So they stayed close to the shore. Out here in the Mediterranean, when it comes to seas, isn't that huge. It's not an ocean per se, but it's far more dangerous out here in the middle of the sea than it is close to shore. You could run to ports. If things got nasty, there were ports all along the way. You could duck into a harbor and be safe. We're going to see that come into play. One of the things that we see with Luke and his presentation of things, especially here more than anywhere else, Luke really understood sailing technology. And this is just me, again, surmising, but Luke was a physician. He was an educated man, and I think he kind of geeked out on this stuff. He traveled a lot, and he was fascinated with the technology. I'm kind of like that. I love airplanes, and I know the differences between different types of airplanes, even the commercial aircraft. And if I were writing about a travel log, I'd probably be talking about some of those things. And that's what we see with Luke. He uses the terminology of sailing. He doesn't just say we got on a boat and went this way, and I'm not going to get into the details of that, but it is interesting that it's just another insight into Luke and who he was and what mattered to him. So they're on this ship and they're going up. Oh, but first, let's see who's with them. You've got Aristarchus. Aristarchus is named on a number of occasions in the New Testament. And where is Aristarchus? He's a Macedonian. And remember, Macedonia, when up north of Ephesus, and it kind of, the coast turns to east-west there. That's where Thessalonica is. That was Macedonia. Remember, Paul had a vision of a man from Macedonia saying, come over and help us. He is a believer, a Jew from Thessalonica. Now, we would have thought, if we go back to Acts 16 and look at what happens there, that's Thessalonica, the is right there. You know, we have the right next door is Philippi and all that happened there. There was trouble in Thessalonica. We would have thought that there weren't any Jews who were converted, and yet here's Aristarchus, and he has been traveling with Paul. He is mentioned in Acts 19:29, and this is when he was in Ephesus, and there he is, Aristarchus, Gaius and Aristarchus, two Macedonians who were with him. He's also mentioned in Colossians 4:10, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, greets you. That's when Paul was locked up. Aristarchus apparently was also locked up. Remember, Philippians is one of the prison epistles, and then Philemon 24, another one of the prison epistles written at the same time, probably carried by the same man to the churches they were sent to. That's Ephesians, Colossians, Philippians, and Philemon. There he is, talking about who greets him, and so do Mark, Aristarchus, Demas, Luke, my fellow workers. So Aristarchus is one of those people that we see there with Paul regularly. Just interesting. It's important to remember these were real people. They had friends, they had companions, the people with whom they traveled. Had Aristarchus been with Paul the entire time that he was there in Caesarea and arrested and all of that? We don't know. He might have been coming and going and continuing the work. I'm sure that if they weren't locked up, Paul was telling Luke, he was telling Aristarchus, Demas, whoever else, go preach the gospel here, go preach the gospel there, come back to me and tell me what's going on. Good to think about these things. We tend to make the people of Scripture kind of Bible cutouts, like the little paper cutouts that would get stuck on a board in Sunday school class when we were kids, or on a felt board. These were real people, multidimensional. You know, they had lives that went beyond what is recorded for us here in the text. The next day they put in at Sidon. Well, let's take a look at where Sidon is, and does that sound familiar? Sidon is up here, where the little hand in place of a cursor is. Sidon is up there. And you will recall Jesus going and ministering in, and it's easy to miss because it gets listed second, Tyre and Sidon, right? Matthew 15:21-28, the faith of a Canaanite woman with the woman who came and said, O son of David, my son is severely oppressed by a demon. And he didn't answer her. And he says he was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. It's not right. Give the children's bread to the dogs. And she said, yes, Lord, even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table. So again, another place that had been ministered to by Jesus and probably other apostles and disciples since. But they put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly. There it is, kind to him, and gave him leave to go see his friends and be cared for. This is not the norm. That's why Luke calls it out here. Now, maybe they just sent along a Roman soldier to go with him, but if they were there at Sidon for a while, the norm would have been for Julius to say, go lock all these guys up in the local clink, and we'll keep them there until we move on, because the ship is offloading cargo, onloading cargo. These ships were cargo ships. They weren't luxury liners. They weren't passenger ships, although people would be passengers on these ships, and that's how they got about. And putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria, sailing for Italy, and put us aboard. Let's go take a look again, and you will see, we'll center this a little better. They come up here. See, they're not going to go out this way. They're going to sail to the lee of Cyprus, the side where they're protected from the wind. and then they come up here and they sail along the coast and they get to Myra. And here on the map, you'll see the line changes color from orange to green because they get on a different ship here in Myra. And this is where we're picking up with the text now. And this was a ship of Alexandria. So Alexandria, Egypt, the big thing that came from Alexandria, and they had the library, all of that. It was a huge center of many things. Trade. Rome, Italy, got a lot of its grain from Alexandria. So this is a big cargo ship hauling a bunch of grain bound for Rome, more than likely. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salamone, coasting along it with difficulty. We came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. So they sail along. They're having some trouble. They wanted to go here, but the winds are against them. And so they come down here and they sail to the lee, again, protected from the winds, the lee of Crete. So Luke is giving the reasons for why they're doing what they're doing. He's talking about where the ships are from. And in the day, people would have known, and Alexandria is down here, down at the bottom of the screen. They would have known, oh, it's a ship from Alexandria. It's one of those big grain ships that's hauling grain to Rome. And they get to Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. Since much time had passed, what does that tell you? It's been slow going. It's been slow going. Nowadays, you get in a ship, and whatever ship it is, they can go out, whether it's a cargo ship, big container ship, oil tanker, whatever it may be. The weather, yeah, it's going to affect somewhat how fast they go. But for the most part, you can, a ship from England coming over to New York, it takes so many days because it can do such a speed, and they're able to do that speed because they've got great big engines pushing them along. This was determined by the weather and the winds. And at this time of year, this is what they're going to be getting to, the winds shift. And it gets to a point where they didn't go sailing. They just didn't go out there. It was like, yeah, it's winter. We don't go out there at this time of year because storms can kick up and, well, really bad things happen when storms kick up. And remember, we'll just go on a little tangent here, but it's an important tangent. As we tie these thoughts and concepts together here at Decoding the Deception, we are always trying to get into the minds of the people of the text. Because we read the text is for us. It wasn't written to us. And Luke did not have us in mind directly when he wrote this text. I often think that Paul, Luke, Matthew, whoever would probably be surprised that we still have their books, that they're still here. Of course, they'd probably also be surprised that the world is still here. But all of that aside, you think of the sea, and what you think of and what they think of is entirely different. This ties into the apocalyptic literature, everything else in our study of Revelation. The sea is chaos. I think of the sea and I think of Vero Beach. I used to live in Vero Beach. It's my favorite place. Go to the beach, beautiful day, sun, fun, go float, body surf. Be out there in the waves, hopefully don't get sunburn. It's relaxing, it's fun. People go intentionally, just for fun, get on boats and go out in the open ocean. Those ideas would have been madness to these people. They didn't see the sea as recreation. They saw the sea as chaos. Chaos it represented to them chaos at a spiritual level. The sea, you had no idea what it was going to do. You had no idea what's under the water. You can't see it. There are big, scary things there. Leviathan, beasts. And there are. It's one thing to float and have fun in the water when I'm in 8 feet of water or 7 feet of water near the beach of a beautiful resort town. It's another thing to be floating in the water when there's 1,000 feet of water underneath me, and who knows what's down there that might be looking up at me and saying, edible or not? Their idea of the ocean, it was scary. It wasn't a fun place. It was a dangerous place. It represented chaos, and it was. It was. If you've ever been in a boat in rough seas, you know it can turn in a moment from being one thing to something else altogether. It is unpredictable. All of that, not just the spiritual connotations, the connections that are there, that are very important for us to file away. Oh yeah, that's one of those things to pull off the shelf in our mind and say, oh yeah, we're talking about the ocean now. We need to consider how this mindset, their understanding of it, applies to this. Think of it. Revelation 13, the dragon goes and stands on the shore of the sea, and what comes out? The beast from the sea. The beast from the sea that represents civil and ceremonial government, which is chaos, with 7 heads and all that stuff representing all the powers of this world. It comes out of the sea. The beast from the earth is the one that should be terra firma. You can trust it. It's solid. It doesn't move around except rarely with earthquakes, right? You can trust it. That's the beast from the earth. That is the lamb that is really a beast. It looks like a lamb. It speaks like a dragon, representing the Antichrist, the spiritual forces arrayed against God's people. Satan calls forth both of them, okay? But there's a reason one's from the sea and one's from the land. You should be able to trust the one. It's inside the church. It pretends to be a lamb. It comes from the earth. The earth is trustworthy. The ocean, yeah, it's not trustworthy. That's easy to understand that we don't trust it. All of this ties together. Big picture, meta-narrative of Scripture, this is the way they thought. And actually, when it comes to the sea, I think their understanding of the sea is far more appropriate than ours. People go out on an ocean liner and it gets in really bad waves, and you see the videos, people getting bounced around, food flying everywhere, tables flipping over, and it's like, wow, how did that happen? Well, it's what the ocean does, is what a sailor would say. What do you think is going to happen? Back to the text. Since much time had passed, and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, all advised them, saying, Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo in the ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. So, timing. Sailing season is over. Okay. Even the fast was already over. What's that talking about? It's talking about the Day of Atonement, either in late September, early October, depending on what year this was. Okay. Who goes vacations in Florida in October, right? No, the beach season's over, right? It's not as nice. Well, here it was shifting into winter. You don't go out and go sailing. And Paul warns them. He tells them bad things are going to happen. And he's telling them things that they already know are a real possibility. Paul had the advantage of having divine insight into these things, but it's business, right? You take calculated risks, and they decided they were going to go for it. But you notice the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. Not banging on the centurion, but think of the situation here. What does this tell us? Who decided that they were going? It wasn't the owner of the ship. It wasn't the pilot. They were making their case. Paul made his statement, his case. It's the centurion who decides. Interesting. If the centurion had said stay, apparently they would have stayed. It just gives a little bit of insight into the power that a Roman centurion had. We're going to find out this ship has 276 souls on it later on. Next week is when that number comes up, I believe, in chapter 28. But 276 souls, how big is a ship that can have 276 people and a lot of cargo? It's no doubt bigger Then the ship I popped up on the screen here, I just searched and found an image of a ship appropriate for the age and the time frame, and that is there in a storm and is obviously stuck on a sandbank, which is what's going to happen to this ship. But they moved on. And why? There was good rationale for it. The harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, and the majority decided to put out to sea. So where they were here, and I am no sailor, but where they are here, you can see, we zoom in on this a little bit, it's kind of out here on a point of land, and the storms that would come, the ship would be, tied up, anchored, whatever, but it just wasn't a good place to park a ship, bring it into port for the winter. It would have been a rough winter had they stayed there, and that's why they decide to go ahead and sail on. And bottom line, it was all part of God's plan. He's using all of this. And with all this stuff that happens, it's a real good thing for us to do for our own spiritual growth. Because, this is an adventure novel, and it's exciting, and there's all this amazing God stuff that's going on. And it's about Paul, right? It's about Aristarchus. It's about Luke, whoever else was there with them at the time. But there is application here to make our lives. When we see the wind and the waves rising, when we see things that seem chaotic like the sea, completely out of our control, it all seems overwhelming. And what happened with Peter? He wanted to go out and walk on the waves with Jesus. Just said, go ahead, come on. But what did Peter do? Peter looked at the wind and the waves, and he was afraid, and he started to sink. If he'd kept his eyes on Jesus, he would have been okay. What we see here with Paul as he goes through all the things that are going to be described here and everything that's happened heretofore, he keeps his eyes on the Lord. He understands that everything is under the Lord's control, that no matter what happens, no matter how the things in this life, be it imprisonment, poverty, suffering, hardship, loss, legal issues, storms at sea, that no matter what, God's got him in the hollow. He's not going to go through bad things, but the Lord's over all of it. It's okay. The Lord still has us. And that is something that we see with the apostles as they go about doing the Lord's work. And it's something that we need to apply to our own lives. The Lord always takes care of us. And my circumstances, okay, my bank balance, my employment, my health, family relations, whatever it might be, those things are a part of our life. They do not define our life. What defines my life is my standing with my Savior, that I am the apple of His eye, that He holds me in the hollow of His hand and bears me up on His wings to sail above all this stuff. Perspective. We don't think about it enough. And in my perspective, as the horizon changes, as my situation goes from one thing to the next, over which I have oftentimes no control, it's all okay, and I've got peace as long as my eyes are fixed on the author and perfecter of my faith, Jesus Christ. Perspective. Because storms come. Now, when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete, close to the shore. But soon, a tempestuous wind, called the northeaster, struck down from the land, and when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it, and were driven along, running under the lee of a small island called Cauda. We managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on Syrtis, they lowered the gear, and thus they were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. All right. So they set sail from here. They had intended to travel up this way and probably get up next to Achaia, Greece, and travel up that way. But what happens is the storm comes along and they get blown way out here. And it just kind of shows this meandering, because they don't have any idea where they are. They don't have any idea what's going on. They're in a full-blown, up in Maine, they'd call it a nor'easter, right? This huge, huge storm that is just unrelenting. It's not going away. And look at the things that they do. They sailed along Crete, and tempestuous wind comes along. They just gave way to it and were driven along. There was no way to get the ship to go where they wanted the ship to go. And they go down here by Cauda. They managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. I'm guessing that's some kind of a life raft type thing that they pulled behind it, but they secured it. And then they're undergirding the ship. Again, this is Luke showing that he understands nautical terminology. They took ropes and tied them around the boat. You think of getting a rope and throwing it off the back of the boat on both sides and walking the rope up and then tying it tight. You know, the boat is wooden boards held together on a frame. They're afraid it's going to come apart. How bad is it? These professional sailors are afraid it's going to come apart. I have one experience with being in something like a storm at sea. I was with a friend and we were going out on his boat. He had a 20-foot boat and we would go out deep sea fishing off Florida, and we were going out the not the Sebastian Inlet, the Port St. Lucie Inlet, and we were going out. Waves were supposed to be one thing, but farther out they were supposed to be fine. And all of a sudden we're in 8-foot seas in a 20-foot boat, and it's going up and down. And the two guys, the one who owned it and his buddy, they'd been out in boats quite a bit. I didn't panic because they looked like they knew what they were doing, and they waited and they timed as you're riding down the backside of a wave, you crank the wheel and gun the motor and race so that the next wave coming doesn't wash over the back of the boat, and boom, we zoom back in. Called it a day, no fishing that day. I never panicked because they never panicked. And maybe they were faking it, but they looked like this wasn't their first tournament, that they'd done this before, and they were okay. Here, you've got the sailors, the professional sailors, taking drastic action so that you know that you're in really, really serious trouble. First, they undergird the boat. They tie the thing together because they're afraid the waves and the storm are going to bust it apart. Okay? And then, what did they do? They lowered the gear. They just let all the stuff that they would use to control the ship, let it be, and they were driven along. And they began the next day to jettison the cargo. They're taking the bags of grain and tossing them over the side. So there was going to be financial issues with that, right? They were losing the cargo. The trip wasn't going to be profitable. The trip was going to be a loss, but that's how bad it was. They were willing to dump the cargo overboard. Big ship. That took some time. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. Notice how Luke says that? They threw the tackle overboard with their own hands. The stuff they used, the extra rope, all the rigging, all of that stuff it added weight to the ship, and riding low in the water with big storms, it's a problem. And remember, they didn't have bilge pumps to pump out the water and those kind of things. And you see in movies nowadays when there's problems with ships, they threw the tackle overboard. They have given up hope. Okay. And the tackle for the ship was probably more valuable than the cargo. They're fearing total loss here. And then when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. These are the professional sailors. They don't think they're going to make it. That's when real fear sets in, if it hadn't already, not to mention that everybody's probably sicker than can be from being storm-tossed for days and days and days. Since they had been without food, and with all of this, it's almost comical how Paul approaches things. He's cool as a cucumber. He's fine. Solid as a rock. He's not shaken. So he's either nuts, is the way they're going to think it, or he's something special, and he doesn't look nuts. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I worship, and he said, Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told, but we must run aground on some island. This is an amazing scene, and it brings a smile to my face every time I read it. Here among all these people who had given up all hope, Paul stands up and says, you should have listened to me. You shouldn't have set sail from Crete. That takes some moxie. That takes some courage and some confidence. But it's not just pride. It's not just arrogance. It's important that they remember that he had said this, because his God's the one who had told him. And now his God has another message for them. They're not going to lose their lives. They'll lose the ship, but they're not going to lose their lives. What a powerful witness and proclamation of the gospel this is. And do you think, before this time, do you think Paul and Aristarchus and Luke had been sharing the gospel with all these people? Do you think he'd shared the gospel with Julius, the centurion, or do you think Paul thought, no, I better not bother him? You know he was. The guy who sang in jail overnight in Philippi after he'd been beaten. Yeah, he'd preached the gospel between the three of them to all these people. An angel appeared to me, of the God I serve, and he said, you must stand before Caesar. And let's remember, back in chapter 23:11, right after he was arrested, so we're in chapter 27, back in 23, still in Jerusalem, the following night the Lord, Jesus, stood by him and said, take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem, so you must testify also in Rome. That is the sure word of God. And Paul, in faith, held fast to it. You know, we hold on to the rock. The rock is Jesus Christ, and the waves and the winds batter us, and we hold on to him, and we're okay. And he holds on to us. That's even more important. But why was Paul unshaken? Why did he have this courage? Why did he have this faith? And what kind of testimony was this courage and faith and calmness before all these people who knew what Paul was there for, who told him about Jesus? And I think Luke just doesn't say that because it's a given. Paul was going to tell all these people. It's like my dad. He can't help but tell everybody about Jesus. He's walking around in the nursing home telling everybody about Jesus. It's who he is. Paul, he's walking around telling everybody about Jesus all the time. And he knew the Lord was going to have him stand before Caesar. And here it's reaffirmed. You know that the Lord says that nothing in all creation can separate you from him, that you're his. He has literally moved heaven and earth to save you. You think he's going to abandon you because of the hardship in your life? Or maybe he's using the hardship to remind you what really matters, because this whole world is a three-ring circus of distraction, of alluring, dreams of having this, that, doing this, that, being this, that, in this lost and messed up world. So yeah, does the Lord allow and use hardship and difficulty to keep you focused on what matters? Thank God that he does. Think about it that way. Why do you think Paul says, thank God in all circumstances? Do you think he was just blowing smoke? No. We're to thank God in all circumstances. If it's happening, God's using it. Thank you, Lord. What is it I'm to see here? But if you want to be a great witness, but why is Paul here such a great witness? Because when everyone else is afraid, when everybody's thinking, why aren't you giving up on that God of yours? He's standing firm. Most powerful witness. When things are really lousy, when everything really stinks by worldly standards, that's when you really get to shine as the light of the world. You are the light of the world, that you may do good deeds and others see it and glorify God. They pay attention when things are hard. It's easy to say, oh, God's so good to me, when everything's just rolling and going great. Doesn't carry near the weight of God's so good to me when you're really going through hard times. We need to think about things differently, and we need to live differently. Paul, you must stand before Caesar, and behold, God has granted you all those who sail with you. How good is God? The 275 other souls on this boat were going to live because of him. And when they wash up on the shores of Malta in chapter 28, we're not going to get there today. When they wash up on the shores of Malta, do you think they forgot this? No, they were saved because of the God whom Paul served. So take heart, men. For I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on some island. No big thing. We're just going to run aground on some island. Hey, it happens. Courage. You want to be brave? Be faithful. Real simple. Who doesn't want to be brave? Who doesn't want to be brave? You want to be brave? You want to be strong? Just be faithful. That's where faith and strength come from. All the rest of it's false bravado. People do a whole lot of seemingly dangerous things, and you talk to them, they're adrenaline junkies. They're not brave. They got issues. They got to do that stuff to validate themselves somehow. That's not brave. It's not courage. When the 14th night had come, 2 weeks, banged, battered, ship tied together, cargo over the side, and the ship's tackle off the side. As we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. Why? Because they were professionals. The wind felt different, the waves, what they were doing. They could see it. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. And 20 fathoms is 120 feet. That's really shallow. Okay. A little farther on, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. They're down to 90 feet of water. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. It's really tough to be in a storm at sea, approaching land at night when you can't see anything. Much worse. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, unless these men stay on the ship, you cannot be saved. Then the soldiers cut away the ropes from the ship's boat and let it go. So the sailors, they could read the storm. They could read the waves. They knew they were coming up on shore. And in most places, again, maybe if you're from the Northeast or the Oregon and Washington, those places, we think of beach and coming up on the shore and we think of beach. Most of the time it's rocks and there's dangerous stuff underneath. And that's what they had coming. The sailors were going to take the little boat and run for shore. And Paul speaks. And what does the centurion do? At this point, whatever Paul says goes. Boom. Cut the ropes. Let the boat go. We're all in this together. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take some food, saying, today is the 14th day that you have continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Think about that. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength, for not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you. More assurance, more comfort. Not only are you going to survive, you're not going to be injured. And when he had said these things, he took bread and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. There he is, being a faithful guy, eating his food, thanking God for it in the midst of this colossal storm. Then they were encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship, and when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. So now even the rations go into the sea. Okay. All right. Now the shipwreck. Now when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. So they cinched everything down. Then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any of them should swim away and escape. Let's just talk about that. This comes up many times. You lose your prisoners, you forfeit your life. It really encouraged being very effective and diligent guards. Okay? So if these people washed up on shore and ran away and got away, the soldiers were in real danger. So in their view of things, it wasn't irrational to kill the prisoners rather than let them go. And again, because God had put it in Julia's heart to take a liking to Paul, this wasn't going to happen. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land, and the rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land. So everybody makes it. Everybody makes it. And we see this continuing theme of God working things out. They're all going to make it up on shore. And there is no way, as they were battered by those waves. Now look at those waves, look at the ship. Imagine jumping into that to swim to shore. But God saw them through all of it, and he did that for Paul's sake, for Aristarchus and for Luke. It's all in his hands. It's all under his control, and his will is done, and nothing in this world, nothing underneath this world, nothing in the heavens above can keep that from happening. So we're going to stop here. I do encourage you to come out here to our website and check that out, decodingthedeception.com. Very easy to find. But out here, you can find all our Bible videos. You can find other resources. I'm getting the video knowledge base built up again about all kinds of different topics of things that go on in this life, the books that we recommend, all that stuff. You can learn about us and who we are and what we're about and how we look at things here at Decoding the Deception. All of that is here on the website. So I do encourage you to make use of that. You can even go up here and click on the contact, and you can send us a message if you so choose, and that comes directly to our email. Do all the things that help this video get out there. I encourage you. Give it a thumbs up, share it, leave a comment down below. All of those things help get the word out about this video to others. This is Matthias 76, and together we are decoding the deception. God bless and have a great day.